they had a bad reputation for a period of time. People were saying don't get it, don't get it. But they made some changes to it. Like they don't put the human sludge in it anymore. Okay. It's just basically urban biomass that's been composted. But they say they're thermophilic for over 6 months.
This is Western Rock?
This is the county landfill.
Oh, okay.
Their mulch is actually, it's pretty decent. Yeah. If I didn't have like a good water source, I would maybe be more careful about sourcing the chips. But like this particular food forest, we got the spring water, number one. We're gonna be pumping from the pond. So we're gonna be able to make it rain in here. Like what we're doing is we're putting ag guns on the perimeter of the fence lines, and we're gonna have a substantial aerial type irrigation.
Oh, nice.
And so that's going to basically rinse down the chips and you know, render inert any possible contaminants or whatever might be in the system. I'm just not too worried about it in the sense of, you know, this overall system is a big carbon filter. We've brought in so much biomass and so much carbon that you know, I guess what I'm pointing to is that sometimes when you talk about urban mulch, you do need to be careful about the herbicides, pesticides, petrochemicals that you're getting in your cityscape, you know, as it comes into that landfill and gets processed down. But like I say, between being thermophilic for over 6 months and being able to rinse this system after just even a few months, it'll be basically I'd say neutralized for the most part. That's speculation, you know. That's pure speculation, but I've seen the power of nature in terms of like processing down contaminants and things like that. So it's something to think about. It's definitely a factor.
So from this viewpoint, the water will start right up over there?
Yeah. Yeah, it comes in the corner there, and we have options. We can either flood the hugelkultur, which is this perimeter terrace, or we can just take the water and send it right over the waterfall and fill the crater garden. And avoid flooding the hugelkultur. In the beginning, the strategy is basically we will go ahead and flood this terrace several times, many times this year. But as time goes on, and maybe even by next year, we won't flood it at all. It may never ever get flooded again. And the reason being because these terraces are, you know, like in this area here, it's over 6 feet deep. And once the microbiology takes off, we don't want to drown everything out. It'll get drowned. It's just too much water. So the earthworms and all that soil biology, it would get overwhelmed by that much water. So we'll build up the hydrological flow, if you will, the water plume, the water lens in the land as it's making its way towards the low spot. Get that built up and substantiated this year before the microbiology takes off. After that, back off and let the aerial and natural precipitation maintain the water levels in the hugelkultur, because once they're charged up, they're going to hold moisture basically indefinitely, and there's no need to over irrigate that. So that's the general strategy for that aspect.
Epic design.
Any questions from you, Mr. J?
Just how epic it is. So will the water line potentially on fills come up to the lip of the bottom of the chinampa?
Yeah, pretty close to it. Ideally, maybe 3 to 4 inches below the lip there. Yeah.
Awesome.
There's no need to go any higher than that. You're just going to flood out the plants and create problems.
And these basins, are they overflow basins, more like wicking basins?
These two basins here,
yeah.
they're just I guess you could say a derivative of the design. They're an interior little hugelkultur terrace, and you can see clearly any aerial and natural precipitation is just going to come right in and soak these. But these are about 2 feet deep, biomass capped with about 4 inches of soil on top. And yeah, they're just hugelkultur terraces, but they don't get flooded. They'll never be flooded. They're strictly aerial and natural precipitation. This center vein here is coming from the perimeter and creates a little waterfall going over into the pond.
How did you cross beam this? How did you create the walkable bridge?
So if you look underneath here, there's a cross member here. So these logs are actually resting on another log, and that'll help them last longer.
Okay.
So they don't break down super quick, and the bridge will be here with us a little longer. But the cross members underneath are actually railroad ties.
Oh, okay.
And they're also sitting on the same cross members. So this was just a reuse. Those railroad ties were actually the raised grow beds from the previous garden.
Brilliant.
And we just don't want to use, you know, the creosote and the railroad ties as a raised grow bed
Right.
type thing. So this was a way to reuse that element and but I like to build bridges in this way. They're really quick and easy to build, and they take on a pretty cool look. We'll actually seed the bridge, so it'll
Oh,
have a
wow.
ground cover growing on it, and it'll look really cool when we get down the road here a few years.
And you were saying if it breaks down in certain areas, no big deal. That's part of the design.
It's part of the design. Things are going to settle. You're not trying to really aim for total perfection. It is a forest. It is a wild vegetable garden.
Right.
And so, you know, but that it doesn't have to be that way. Things can be more groomed than that. They can be more perfect, like a golf course or whatever. We can do that. It is possible to do that. But my general sense is to let things kind of go a little wild.
Yes.
Is if you can embrace a wild look, that's going to go a long ways.
This
for you.
bridge will feed the forest.
Yeah, the bridge is feeding the forest, totally. Yeah.
It's beautiful. And you did this all out of your head, Andy? There was no schematics or blueprints or anything like that?
No, not really. Not on this design. And I do appreciate a well-laid plan. I recommend it. It'll help you avoid problems and mistakes and things like that. So I definitely recommend a plan. But once you get some confidence, and you can just kind of go for it. Particularly the irrigation schematics is where you're going to run into needing a little bit more of a design idea and maybe something on paper to help you avoid problems when you're doing that. But yeah, this particular design, I knew that I wanted a perimeter swell system around the central pond.
To center.
Yep, and so it just came down to the basic determination. The essential determination was how much earth are we going to be taking out so that we know how much displacement there is. And that gave me an idea how tall the swells should be, based on how much, you know, so that we didn't run out of material. If we tried to make the swells too tall, there wouldn't have been enough excavation to build the swells. So that's the balancing act there that you would want to be aware of, is just a basic idea of how much, you know,
Material you have.
Yeah, so that you don't, and had we not made the swell tall enough, then the pond wouldn't be deep enough.
Okay.
You know, so because or at least you'd then be hauling it off. You'd be trucking the material out of there.
How many truckloads of material did you bring in on this
None.
project?
None.
None?
No.
No soil,
What you
but
see here is
hugel material and what? And mulch material.
On the hugel, the biomass, I mean, there was already a lot on the ground from, they were collecting for years.
Okay.
You know, I think 3 or 4 years, pretty steady. So we gathered all that up and rolled it into this design. But then I hauled in maybe 10 7-yard loads, I think, something like that. So there might be, I think I probably brought in about 100 yards.
Okay.
Somewhere on that order. Now this job we didn't come across a single rock in the excavation, so that's not always a good thing. I like to kick up rocks because then we can use them in the spillways.
Right.
We can use them to shore up banks, and I mean the rocks are kind of a pain in one way, but they're also something that you have to work with. So we'll probably bring in some rocks on this job just so that we can pack this little pond and create the spillway. The terrace step that you see over there is actually going to be a little beach, a little sandy beach.
Oh, wow.
So we'll do a fire pit there, and this just be a place to hang out by the pond with the ducks. And
are they putting a liner or anything in that pond, or what's the...
No. Definitely not going to do like a rubber liner or anything like that. If we do determine that we want to go ahead and hold the water for longer periods of time, we'll line it with clay, waterproofing clay. We have several sources for that. There's Western clay, it's real premium clay, and it's like $45 a ton. But then there's the local native, you know, the local blue clay, and that stuff we can get for about $5 a ton. And it works really well too. Now, my understanding on it is that the blue clay can cloud the water, but I don't have first-hand experience on that yet. So we're just getting some of those designs installed now. So we'll see. I can't say I have a preference on the clays yet, but the $5 a ton is appealing.
Yeah.
So
I
mean, we could line this whole pond right here for like, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred, you know, $300-400 in clay. But then you have your labor, and that's where you get into a lot of work. But this is already a pretty high clay content in this land, and so we're gonna give it a try. We're gonna see how well it holds and just test it out first. And if it just feels like we want to hold the water longer, then yeah, we'll go ahead and take that measure. Now, when I line it with clay, what I like to do is pack it with rock as well. So this pond. We would line this with about a foot of clay, 8 inches to a foot, and then I would start at the bottom, and I'd just literally do like a cobblestone type riprap of rock, and line the whole thing with rock. And then if you want like more of a sandy bottom, then you could bring in some sand and go over the top of the rock. But the rock is going to hold the clay on the walls, so it doesn't just fall off. Because particularly ducks, they'll go and bill around and they'll knock your clay off and knock the clay down, and then you lose your waterproofing. So it's a little extra step, but it makes it last forever. It's done, and you never have to look back. It's just it's reliable and never fail you. So.